Accessing library computer data.
Out there are no saints. Just people.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. Continuing our run-through of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Right now we're up to the episode called Afterimage, without a space in between after and image. It is the third episode of the 7th season, aired on the 14th of October, 1998. This episode was written by Renee Echevarria, directed by Les Landau. In this one, Ezri Dax has trouble adjusting with the rest of the crew, and Garak inexplicably collapses. We're joined by Clay. Clay, how are you?
I believe it's pronounced Afterimage.
Oh yeah, I'm not getting the reference, but I like the cut of your jib.
No, I believe it's French for being confused when the spirit of your wife is in a different body.
Oh sure, understandable. That's something I blocked.
It was a whole genre of literature in the 18th century in France.
They went through that.
I do really enjoy that Quark has basically turned into Matthew McConaughey from Dazed and Confused in this episode, where he's like, well, I keep getting older, and Dax just keeps getting younger and hotter.
You know, Quark was interesting to me because I feel like Quark, even though he seems to be acting very quirky, is actually the most genial person of all of them, because he's like, hey, he's so accepting of the situation. You know what I mean? Like it seems it fits his character to be that way, because he's just kind of like sleazing after the new Dax. But it seems like he's also the most mature out of everybody here who's handling this the best. And that's kind of an interesting little shift up for me. But we're here to talk about Ezri Dax. The episode seems to take place right after the second episode, Shadows and Symbols. It's like the day after, I think. So we're going to deal with all the stuff that we thought was not dealt with at the end of that episode. And we're going to do it right now. So we're going to take a break. I'm going to play an audio clip. Me and Clay are going to come back and we're going to break down Afterimage.
It's funny. Before yesterday, I'd never set foot on this station, but it's as familiar to me as the back of my hand. Isn't that odd? You have no idea who I am, do you? I didn't think so. Thanks for listening, anyway.
I had kind of a strange reaction to this one. I didn't like it at all at the start. As it started moving along, I liked it a little bit more, and I thought that maybe, this is going to go places. And then I slept on it, and I woke up, and I'm not sure I really am crazy about this episode. I feel it's really, not to spoil anything, but it's really like the definition of a 3 to me in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And I think that if you just want to say what you thought about the episode in general, and then I want to get to the big question after that. So if you just want to give your sort of breakdown, and then we'll move on to the bigger points.
The first thing that I thought was I actually thought it was a better. I thought what they were doing here was what I felt like they should have done at the end of the last episode, where we were kind of saying how it was strange that they just sort of breezed by the fact that Dax is here, and they're like, well, here we go again. You know, this one, they're sitting with it a little bit more, and Worf is weird, and even she is weird towards Worf. I liked that stuff, but it seemed like there was too much going on in this episode. Specifically, the Garak stuff felt like it should have been its own episode. And doing this Garak storyline, plus the stuff with Ezri trying to deal with these other characters, plus the Worf stuff, and her trying to figure out whether or not she wants to leave. It just felt like a lot of stuff that could have been its own episode jammed into one episode. And I wonder if they had more time, if they, weren't being canceled, they would have let it breathe a little bit more. I don't mean that to be snarky. I mean, if you know you've only got 26 episodes left.
Yeah, how much time do you want to devote to
You got to get
this?
the stuff. I don't know if necessarily they needed to do Garak feels claustrophobic because of he's letting the Cardassians die or something in this episode. It seemed like it was that was interesting when they got to it, but it just seemed like too much, and it wrapped up so fast.
I actually don't like the Garak storyline. I don't believe that Garak would break down like this. I don't think.
Yeah.
Like, I sort of understand it on a technical level of like, oh, maybe it kind of makes sense. But everything I know about Garak, he's basically been trained to be a super spy. And he's done bad things through it. And I understand that he now feels extra bad because he's doing it to his own people and he feels like he's betraying them on some level. But I still feel that a spy of his like CIA Obsidian Order wouldn't crack like this. He wouldn't just like fall apart completely in the way that he does here. And I feel like it's too quick. It's too much. And I don't really believe it's true to the Garak character. The only moment I like of his storyline is when he gets harsh in a way with Ezri when he's saying like, don't talk to me when you can't even handle your own problems.
Yeah.
And I like
you don't
that.
even know who you are.
Yeah, I like that turn from Garak. I feel like Garak should do that more often. He should expose this sort of like dark core that he has at his center.
Yeah.
And I like that moment, but I don't like the setup, and I don't buy that he would crack under pressure like this.
Yeah, I think it's interesting idea that he might have this sort of reaction. But yeah, it didn't really, the setup I didn't find that interesting, and the way it shook out wasn't really that interesting. It seemed like, do you remember in Groundhog Day, at the end of Groundhog Day, where she finally comes in to see Bill Murray's character in the way he's turned everything around, and it's just like a parade of people coming over to him and thanking him for all the things that they did for him. Mm-hmm. It felt kind of like that, where it was like they kind of wrap things up, and then that last scene, it's like, oh, Garak is thanking her for this, and then Quark is like doing this, and it seemed like so much stuff happening that was just sort of resolved very quickly. Where the story isn't necessarily about her solving all this stuff. It's about her coming to terms with the Worf stuff and the fact that she wants to be here, I just don't know. I think the approach was a little bit off on this one, because it's very light too. Not that it shouldn't be. It doesn't have to be like, grimdark or anything. But yeah, I don't know. The tone was kind of all over the place. There were a few scenes that I liked. But they still even didn't really get to the heart of what I thought they should have gone for or could have been going for. Like the scene with Worf and her, where Worf is like, I recognize that you are not my wife, and blah, that scene was pretty good, but I feel like there's more meat there that they didn't explore because they were doing so much other stuff.
Yes.
Like I think that just having an episode, and maybe it's not this episode, it probably shouldn't be this episode, because, you're kind of setting stuff up here. But the idea that Bashir is apparently totally in to try and get with Ezri, and like the concept of like, it's almost like if your wife, like a movie where you think your wife is dead, but then she shows up and she has amnesia and falls in love with your best friend, except she doesn't have amnesia in this situation. Mm-hmm. She's just
has a free card to swing.
Yeah, it's a really interesting and unique concept. And the whole time I'm thinking like, man, he has got some balls on him to do this. Bashir. Because, Bashir has balls to go for this. I know he was in love with Dax or whatever. And especially Dax on the other end being like, by the way, if Worf didn't marry her, I would have been with you. It's like, that's pretty fucked up.
Well, that's the... So I guess a good place to start here before we go into that, because I really like the... I wish the episode was just the Worf and Dax.
I hope everyone is enjoying that this is just like a little bit of Star Trek in between coughs for an hour.
Cough-a-palooza. Apologize, we're both still...
It's just going to get worse the more into the winter we get, so buckle in.
We're both pretty sick still. I would have wanted this to be a Worf and Dax episode, I think. Yeah. I'd agree with you that it's too cluttered. I would have cut out the Garak thing completely for reasons that I think we'll get to eventually, not just beyond the fact that I don't buy it for Garak. But the one thing I'll say that's good about Ezri is that Ezri's setup showed to me what the problem with Jadzia Dax's introduction at the start of the series was, which is that they thought that Jadzia Dax simply being a Trill was a good enough character setup for her.
Yeah.
And it's not. What you need is something like Ezri has, which is that she's not prepared for this joining process, so she's confused by it. Yep. And that adds something to her character, where the Jadzia Dax thing played the early seasons basically is kind of like, isn't it novel that this is what I am? Like, isn't this kind of a unique thing? But Ezri actually has to struggle through it. And I think that her conversation with Bashir is a byproduct of that, because of now with all these experiences that she's had, she's confused about what she's supposed to say to people in situations because she hasn't gone through the Trill training or whatever to get ready for this. And I think that's really good. And I think that that's an important part of the way that they should have set up Dax all the way from the beginning. And I like that they do it with her here. I think fundamentally, this comes back to a problem that I still had with Jadzia, which is that it is extremely unclear to me, and I know people don't like it that I complain about this all the time because they think it's obvious, but it's extremely unclear to me what the relationship between the symbionts and the host is in a Trill.
Oh, yeah, 100%. No, I'm thinking the same thing. I mean, I've been thinking that since day one.
But I think, like, people want to say that they're a melding of the personalities, but you have these weird situations where in the previous episode, she goes, Benjamin, it's me, Dax, right? Yeah. In this episode, she refers to what is this symbiont doing inside of me, which is completely opposite of why would you introduce yourself as Dax and then refer to the symbiont as this like thing that's just kind of stuck inside of you? So because you don't understand what the relationship is in a Trill mind, you have a hard time understanding how she is reacting to the Worf situation because you don't know where she's coming from. You know where Worf is coming from, and I think that that's really interesting. But I don't think that they set up the Trill effectively enough to really give you a good sense beyond the fact that this is a confused person who can kind of react in a lot of different ways depending on how they want to write the scene with her. Yep. And I don't think that's very effective. I think you need a hard determination of whether or not Dax is the driver of the personality and whether Worf was in love with Dax instead of Jadzia. You know what I mean? Or if he was in love with Jadzia and the Dax symbiont is now like, hey, listen, we have to move on.
Yeah, I've always been fascinated that the symbiote personality is essentially just as strong as the person's personality.
That seems to be the argument, that it's a perfect mix of the person and the symbiont.
And I don't know. I do feel that it makes it kind of complicated because you don't know what this character is feeling at any given moment. And also that can be an interesting character trait, but they never really get into it. They only kind of use it. They pick a side depending on what they need for the scene, essentially.
Yep.
And I've always been surprised that they haven't that the symbiote wasn't more dialed back. So like what she was doing in this episode where it was like, oh, she's standing on her head because that's what the gymnast did, or she's really space sick because of this other personality or whatnot.
She can't eat meats or something because one of them was vegan or something like that. She makes some comments about that.
Yeah, like that sort of fairly what's the word I'm looking for? Abstract crossover, I think is really interesting and great. But when you bring it to the point where it's like, I have all of the memories of these people, then I think it gets really confusing.
Right.
So if it was like, if it was these things coming out through her where it's like, oh, well, I have this memory of this feeling. It's not specific. I don't remember when I don't remember how Worf, you and I, went to that certain planet that specific time and did that very specific thing and had that very specific food. I can't remember that, but I do remember like a sense of love between us, like something, like something like that. That's a little bit more abstract and creates at least a little more definition as to who's driving the ship here.
Right. But I get the impression that the symbiont is more in control of things than that because...
No, it seems to be, yeah.
Because I would agree with you. If the sense was that it was like this vague, you have this sort of vague memory of these things and you are a different person and therefore you're not in love with someone like Worf, it doesn't come across that way because the symbiont should know that what it's doing to Worf is not fair to him.
Right. That's
my problem with this thing, and it's probably my problem with the whole episode, I think, is because if the Dax symbiont is controlling this, the Trill society, and they mentioned in the episode, has these rules about how you can't continue past lives. You have to like start over again. And that seems, that's like logical to me. That makes a lot of sense. You can't just, you can't have Worf's problem here, which is a previous host dies and then you come back and just sort of like fuck with their life again.
Yeah. If that's a rule, she 100% should not be on Deep Space Nine.
Right. And that's like,
coming back to life and dating Bashir is very much continuing her old life.
That's the problem, I think. And I would understand that if it's more the personality and she doesn't really understand it. However, I get the sense that because the memories are so strong and she refers to herself as Dax, then the symbiont is the thing that is sort of like at least 60% of control or whatever. My idea for this would be, or the problem I had with it is it a smart idea to bring back Dax into this series? I see a much improved episode if Dax only exists for these first 3 episodes, or 4 if you want to make this into a double parter, as you were saying, to expand it a little bit. And the thing is, Dax leaves at the end because she's like, this is like the end. I can't continue on with this. I'm hurting Worf too much. It's not fair to him. The only reason I'm really sticking around is because Ben Sisko seems to want a friend to hang out with.
Yes.
If you...
She got jumped. They basically graduated her early from doctor school and jumped her from an ensign to a lieutenant just because Sisko was lonely.
Yeah, he had a good. He's like, well, she's been around.
What are you really going to learn in those last year and a half of counselor school?
And she doesn't even seem to be a good counselor. But I think that would be the more effective thing. Is if this is the true goodbye to Dax, and it's this kind of mysterious thing about whether or not you're saying goodbye to Jadzia Dax, or if this is a new person who kind of recognizes that they have to move on and the ship has sailed. But I don't think that her sticking around really makes any sense on any level other than they're just replacing the cast member with a cast member who is easily replaceable at this point. Yeah. And that's
landfill.
That's too bad, I think. I think it's more profound if Dax does not stick around. So and I feel that the episode itself suffers from that tension where it's like she has to be there, so we're just going to kind of railroad her in. And I feel Worf gets the shit end of the stick, quite frankly, out of all this, because it's horrifically unfair to do this to him, I think.
Oh yeah, 100%. And I mean,
his reaction to Bashir is great, where he slams it. Like, it's actually a nice episode for Worf because it kind of makes him look intimidating again. Yeah, which is neat.
Yeah. That scene was great where he's pushing him around and threatening Quark and stuff. And he does have this great sort of, I find the emotion of the situation, clearer and more interesting through Worf than I do through anybody else, because Worf is exhibiting both at the same time. Don't touch my wife, and my wife is dead.
Yeah. Yep.
And it's really interesting. And that's why I wish they had given an entire episode to this, not only because it deserves it. I mean, we talked about how shitty Dax's death was at the end of the last season. I mean, you have an opportunity here to really, really get into that, and they're clearly not going to do that. Unless, I don't know. I mean, unless they come back to it, but it feels like this is the end of that story. More or less.
It is more or less the end of that kind of conflict for Worf. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's really interesting, and it's 100% unfair. And the fact that there's not a scene, unless I'm forgetting it, there's not a scene with Sisko and Worf where Worf is like, "Dude, what the fuck?"
No, there isn't.
That I feel like that scene would be very beneficial to the story that they're doing here, because whether it's Worf coming into Sisko and saying, you can't do this to me, you're disrespecting Dax and you're disrespecting me, or the other way around where Sisko comes to Worf and is like, listen, I understand what you're going through, but
we're professionals.
300-year-old bros before hoes, I guess. I don't know. And you could have Worf blow up at him or something like that, and really, really get to the, there's a little bit of it where he, someone says something about his wife, and then he's like, about Jadzia, and he's like, no, Jadzia is dead, and she's been shuffled off to Klingon Valhalla, whatever it's called. I forget what it's called.
Stovacor.
No, Stovacor. That sounds like a drug.
It does. It sounds like a nice hamburger helper mix, I think, too, sometimes.
Yeah, you see that advertised in between CNN segments. Ask your doctor if Stovacor is right for you. But he says it very calmly. But to have him really get into that, I think is unfortunate that they didn't give him the opportunity or give the character the opportunity to really rip into this idea that, how is he as a Klingon supposed to square this?
Right.
That he has his wife is dead, and as far as his belief system goes, she has been ushered off into her rightful place in next to the Odin or whatever. I've been watching a lot of Vikings lately, so it's coming through. And then all of a sudden she shows up again, and people are acting as though it's the same person to a certain extent,
Yes.
And it's the Klingon religion and custom do not account for trills.
No, they certainly don't, and I agree. And I think that, like, as you were saying, the hard part is that they're treating her kind of the same way, but also taking off as if she's taking advantage of the fact that she's not the same. And Bashir is doing that the most egregiously, I think. And it's a tough position. I don't think that Star Trek seems to have a problem with death or dealing with the ramifications of death. They do it poorly more often than they do it well. And I thought that Jadzia was a good chance to handle that in a little bit of a better way. And I think that you're right that this is too rushed of a wrap up. Like, Worf giving the cheers at the end is kind of nice, but at the same time, you're like, you really should have stretched this out a little bit. Like, this doesn't feel true to form that these characters would be doing this. And what's too bad about it, and I think is sort of a misstep, is that I think Dorn is pretty good here. He has his comedy is really good at this point, where O'Brien walks in with the wine. He says, "Not again," with the thing, because they repeated the getting drunk from the first two episodes of the season. He's good there. He's good intimidating. I like the little beat of when he's holding Bashir. Bashir tries to squirm himself free and he can't. Worf just overpowers him and holds him there. I really like that moment. The other thing that, like, it's a small thing, but I'm not sure Worf has ever said the name Quark. He calls him Ferengi and Ferengi bartender all the time, which is a really neat touch that I kind of like, and I noticed it here. But they just did that character, like, they've drawn him up very well, and to bring him into this Dax situation where I can't find a good argument for keeping Dax around. She seems to be a fairly bad counselor for one thing, because Garak basically explains himself to her, and she doesn't really do anything for him. And Sisko wants to keep her around just because he's sort of used to this. He's like, "Hey, cool, I met 3 Daxes in my lifetime. Like, what a unique thing for me." And it just doesn't sit right with me.
You know what would have been cool, and would have been a way that I think would be more acceptable to keep her around? If the Trill was damaged somehow, so her memories were not completely clear. Like, if there was room there was some wiggle room there as far as, like, what she was present. And I mean, I guess this is just a roundabout way of me getting to the thing I said before, where the symbiote memory is not just clear memories, but have the symbiote be damaged or something that would so you could have that thing where people are coming up to her and being like, "Oh, Dax, oh, this is weird," and she's like, "I don't really know who you are. I have a vague impression of it, but I don't really, something like that." I think would give you a little more wiggle room for this character, where it can still be Dax, but there's, like, it's essentially Dax with symbiote brain damage, I guess.
Well, I guess the way that I think you could do it, this is kind of the same thing, but it's a little bit different, is that the symbionts, because they're so long-lived, are used to this kind of situation, and the emotional response is purely a host response to things. So the symbiote should be sort of cool and collected, and that would argue against the fact that Worf didn't fall in love with Dax. He fell in love with Jadzia at that point. However, it all just comes down to the fact that we don't know what the Trill are. It's too hard to tell whether or not this is actually a thing or not. And if you're just going to say, like, well, it's all very confused because they're mixed up together, and who can tell where the host starts and the symbiont starts, that's not very good for a story issue, because you just can't latch on to whatever they're trying to talk about. And, as interesting as the Worf and Dax thing that they pit against each other here, it just comes down to the fact that Ezri is too confused about what she's doing to Worf for it to make sense to me in terms of the symbiont knowing what it's doing. And it just feels like it's an artificial way to keep her around. in a way that is particularly unflattering to Worf, and it feels like they want to get the story out of the way, which is really unfortunate because I loved Worf and Dax as a Star Trek couple. They're my favorite Star Trek couple. So to see it end like this is a little bit frustrating.
You know, I was always surprised, as much as I did like Worf and Dax, and I thought that was a great pairing. I was surprised that they never went sort of the Highlander route with it, where Dax was a little bit more apprehensive to get into like a long-term relationship, because, you know, to do that thing where it's like, Worf, I love you, but you have to understand you're going to die and I'm going to remember you for hundreds of years. And, you know, like that kind of thing where it's, and I was always kind of surprised they never did that, because it feels tailor-made for that. And now they've kind of like done the inverse of that, where it's like she is dead, but technically not dead. And he remembers her, but it's not the same person. So that it's a really interesting, abstract thing that they're playing with, that it feels like they just don't have the capacity to really get into it at this point, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's tough to wrap your hands around it, right? Yeah. That's kind of the problem, and I wonder if that's I like so many moments of the episode, and I feel that the show is good at getting these character moments. Echevarria wrote the script. He's always very good with character things, and I think that all the characters work out well here. And I even intellectually sort of understand what they're trying to do. I think that they misfocus a lot of it, and they don't spend the appropriate amount of time on the things that matter. But just to have it land so dull for me at the very end, it just left me wondering whether or not this was the right thing to do in the first place, or if it's just because it's so confusing, you can't latch on to the emotionality of the moment in it.
Yeah. You know, it also would have been nice to have the symbiote, you know, I know it's the same person, but let's just for the sake of argument say the symbiote address Worf about Jadzia in some way, you know, like, so in that scene where they're hashing it out or whatever, have her say, like, have Ezri say, Jadzia was a great person and she loved you very much, but she, you know, like something like that, where it's the symbiote.
It's obviously a past tense. Yeah, it's a past tense. It's a past tense. The symbiont is speaking in the past tense because it's moved
exactly.
on.
Yeah. So it's the symbiote addressing Worf about Jadzia, and it's not this weird gray thing where it's like, well, I'm technically the same person. You know, just even you can draw that line for that moment, because this thing is so amorphous. You can draw that line for that moment and that emotional beat, where you really could have tied that story off pretty well, and added some closure to it in a way that is not really, they don't really earn here.
I feel there's a lot of poetry that they don't go with. Like, you know, the symbiote needs to be treated a little bit more symbolic than it actually is, I think, for it to be effective, where it's in your case, if the symbiote is speaking, saying like, Jadzia is dead, this is the new state of things. There's a lot of room there for some sort of commentary on like memory and being unable to let things go, even though
it's like, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but what I'm thinking is the scene that she had with Bashir, she should have had that scene with Worf, where she's holding Bashir's hand and saying like, if it hadn't been Worf, Jadzia would have loved you or whatever. It's like, no, he doesn't get that scene. Worf gets that scene.
Right.
You know, talking about her in the third person that way, that 100% should be Worf's scene.
Yeah, the Ezri take should just be, I'm not in love with you, but you made Jadzia very happy, and that sort of lives inside of me. And excuse me, that's kind of what they do. But I just feel there's more room to go into that, about like the difficulty of letting go. And you'll see Jadzia everywhere, and it's not just me. It's like, even if I wasn't here, you'd think you'd be seeing Jadzia in people's faces and things like that. I'm just this embodiment of it, but you have to get past it. And I think that's a little bit more fair to Worf, because that it maybe accelerates his grieving process unfairly, I think, which is not really necessary, and I don't think is fair to do. But it at least turns it around into more of a Worf is dealing with his problems, because I think you have to focus the issue on Worf's perspective, because the Ezri character is just kind of she's not really a character at this point. She should operate more as a like mirror, for lack of a better word. She should be the thing that they're looking at to see how things have changed. And it should be, from Worf's point of view, this is how things are affecting him, and this is how he needs to move on, which I don't think they give him time, because his shift from I don't like this to I'm okay with this happens a bit too fast for my liking. I think he just kind of comes in as like, I'm cool with this now. Cheers. I'll see you later.
Yeah. So quick aside, has nothing to do with that.
Sure.
Why do they need Garak to make them costumes for the holodeck?
It's a good question. Why don't they just holodeck themselves some costumes? They've never done that in any series, though, which is kind of weird.
They always are walking into the holodeck or coming out of the holodeck in costume. So I assume that means that the costumes themselves are not holodeck created.
No, they have to own them. Yeah.
But I mean, I assume that you have replicators you can do that with.
That's true. I
mean,
mean,
maybe not. Maybe Garak is making holodeck costumes for everybody.
His tailor shop is a holodeck. Is that what he's saying? He's just making costumes out there, sewing the things. It's always been a weird. I always felt there was a metaphor that I wasn't understanding there about him being a tailor. I don't know if it's because he's stitching things together or there's some kind of thing, but it's a job that would seem like it screams to be, this is an undercover cop out here with this ridiculous job. Yeah, not crazy about the Garak thing. Why? I guess we just finished with like, why? What is Sisko getting out of this? I guess. Do you see anything deeper there?
No, I mean, not really. I mean, it's.
It all feels very. It all feels sort of stock to me. His thing where he chews her out felt kind of like, it's like, yeah, this is supposed to happen, but I don't know if this is really right. Where he's like, you're not fit to wear that uniform, God damn it. And she goes out and cries in the hallway. It felt like that's the kind of beat that you need in a script like this, except I didn't feel like it went there for any particular reason other than it has to get to that point. I feel that way a lot about the whole script, I think.
I feel like what's missing there is she has to come back, or there has to be an interaction with them that feels more like the old Dax.
I was going the opposite. I would think that you'd strengthen this by Sisko having a tough time relating to the new Dax.
No, you could do that too. But it was what I mean is like when Dax started to get really good was when she became like the sounding board off of Sisko. And he always treated it as though he was talking to the symbiote, not to the person.
Which strengthens the Symbiont argument, I think, because, I guess the argument may be, is the personality just the collection of memories at that point, or is it the Symbiont doing stuff? Like, you know what I mean?
Because, like, if it is to be as, if it is as much of a personality or total mind shift as that seems to be in some spaces, when Sisko gets in her face, she should be like, Ben, back the fuck off.
Right. Yeah.
We've been through X, Y, and Z, and you know that blah, blah, blah. And I've been, I've done this, blah, 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 blah. You have no right to talk to me, blah, that kind of thing. But they don't do that. They just have her kind of like cower behind the fact that she can't handle all these people inside of her.
Yeah.
Are we doing phrasing? No? Okay. I think they could have handled it. It's just, I think overall it's like it's a weird missed opportunity to get into some stuff that they probably could have dealt with if this wasn't going to be her last time on the show.
Right.
They probably could have stretched it out and gotten into it as they go. But again, it's a thing that feels like it's not good for a final season to do this.
Right. That's my concern. To insert her.
I'm with you. They should have. I actually thought the way that they were going is I thought she was going to leave at the end.
Yeah.
And I think they probably should have done that.
I'd agree. It feels just it's unfortunate to happen in the final season because it feels like you're inserting this character who just has to fill a space that way, and they did it the easiest way possible. So Ezri gets the short end of the stick, I think, as well, because she doesn't have time to really develop as a character. I think there are 3 Ezri episodes in this season, and the way that I would have symbolically seen this before we call this a day is the new Dax is different from Jadzia, and I think that that's a important way to approach it because it kind of shows that Worf is unable to let go, even though it's this new thing that's coming on. And Sisko, you could have difficulty relating to the new Dax. The problem is the handoff from Curzon to Jadzia was so seamless that they can't do that without it not making sense. So they've proven through the Curzon to Dax thing that the personality remains mostly the same, and it just passes on to a new host.
Yeah.
And if you want to go in a more interesting way, that ties into the problem of Dax wasn't well defined in the early season because they thought that was enough. But if you want to go in like a interesting writer direction with it, there has to be something wrong about that transfer. There has to be something that changes you fundamentally, even though it's the same quote unquote person. Something has changed so drastically that you can no longer relate to them anymore.
Yeah, I think where they try to cover that a little bit, and I think it's just sort of a hand waving away to kind of, instead of actually getting into it, is when they talk about how she like didn't complete the training or something to be a host or whatever.
Yeah.
I think that's supposed to be the quote unquote technobabble excuse as to why she's dealing with this so poorly, or at least less than great.
And why Dax was such a smooth, or Jadzia was such a smooth handoff, as opposed to her.
But I don't know. I think that's not. I don't find that really that satisfactory. I wish they had delved into it a little bit more.
Yeah. Let's take a break. We're going to play an audio clip. Me and Clay will come back. We'll read some patron thoughts and give our final thoughts about Afterimage.
I am not certain that I have treated you the way that Jadzia would have wanted.
You'll get no argument from me there.
I loved her with all my heart.
And she loved you.
Part of me is glad to know that she is not gone forever. But in some ways, it would be easier if she were.
I know.
Thank you very much for listening. Thank you for supporting the show. If you want to support the show some more, you can go to patreon.com/thepenskyfile. A couple dollars a month gets you extra stuff. And as always, our Captain Tier supporters get a shout out. Special thanks go to Andrew Cherlog, Ben Douglas, Captain Quark, Cardinal Doomsday, Christian Pouch, David K, Dwayne Hackett, Eric Johnson, Icy Unicorns, Yarpy, Joint Mango, Kevin Reyes, Kyle Barrett, Matt Cutler, Matt Ross, Mike Burnett, Nathan Elliott, Neil Brennan, Nick Sergi, Robert Cummins, Russell Elledge, Samuel Custer, Grim Santo, Sean Spinobi, Tark Latif, Vault 13 Hero, and Will Yates. Thank you very much, guys, for supporting the show. Thank you for listening, of course. And now we'll go to Patreon comments. If you're a patron of the show at patreon.com/thepenskyfile, leave your thoughts about upcoming episodes, and we read them on the show. I have to apologize. I was talking to you about this before we started, Clay. I missed a couple comments last time for not Afterimage, for Shadows and Symbols and the image in the sand. I think people put images in the sand, and it screwed up my Control F search. So if I missed your comment, I apologize, but that's why. It's because I use Control F to find the things, and if there's a difference in the title name, it doesn't pop up. So apologies, but let's move on to the next one, and I guess I'll catch up with your comments in the future version. So sorry about that. That's not the one. Where's one? Number one. Norman Buckwald says, Afterimage, may turn out to be the strongest of the 3 Ezri-centered episodes, as it does a decent introduction of her character and the awkwardness of all the characters on the station who knew Jadzia, unlike Cisco, who also knew Curzon. I just wanted to smack Worf for how he was treating Ezri. He should at least remember Ezri has both Jadzia's memories, which can include her feelings. As for Ezri as a counselor, I remember back in the day many mocked her for being a bad counselor, but you have to remember she was early in her career in Starfleet, including being in that role and having her work with Garak of all people was just golden. Given this episode could be a bit stronger. You can tell Nicole DeBoer was new in her role, and it shows. It's a weak 3 out of 5. I see a lot of people. I saw Norman mentioned here, and I read a couple quote-unquote professional reviews who thought Worf was acting inappropriately, and I strongly disagree with that, I think.
Yeah, I mean, inappropriate, well, I mean, as appropriate as you can act, given the circumstances, I suppose, but like, what did they want?
No, I think he holds himself together quite well, especially for Worf, who is not that kind of character, really, but I think people want him to forgive her more easily than that, but it's like, that doesn't strike me as realistic for anyone, let alone a Klingon, you know?
Yeah, and I mean, like, forgive is a weird word to use, you know? I don't know if it's necessarily forgiveness.
Or just to move on and accept the situation, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously it's not her fault or anything. You know, it's
Right.
just the way that the cards shook out. But yeah, I think it's fine.
That's the main problem I have with Ezri is that Ezri seems to not understand how much pain she's putting Worf through, which is interesting. And that ties into her lack of training, but it seems to me that's like a fundamental human empathy thing. Like, why do you need to be trained to realize that this is a bad idea to go hanging out with your... Zam Nuclear Wessel says, I know a lot of people are impatient with Season 7's Ezri Zodes, but while they're not the best of the season, her new dynamic makes them better filler than the, quote, we're all out of good ideas, end quote, episodes that so marred Season 6. Dwayne Hackett says, a great introduction to Ezri, although not the strongest episode. It was well put together. Belle had her work cut out, or Bear had her work cut out for her. She was acting, I think it means DeBoer. DeBoer had her work cut out for her. She is acting against the cast and the crew who had worked together for years, yet it didn't feel like she was out of place. This is a testament to her acting and character writing, even though Robinson giving her a run for the money. The idea for her to stumble with her past selves was brilliant and probably helped the audience sympathize to the character, as it made her appear more vulnerable. Overall, her formal introduction was handled well in this episode. And yes, O'Brien, they were far too close. 4 out of 5. I like the end of this episode where everyone's at the party and saying like hello to Ezri and all the couples are coming up and Bashir and O'Brien come up basically holding hands and then walk off at the end. Very strange. Excuse me. The reading's making my coughing act up for some reason. 4 out of 5 from Dwayne Hackett for Afterimage. Matt Ross says, the formal introduction of Ezri showing the awkwardness of all the characters and the troubles with Worf, Jadzia, Bashir, Quark. Worf is back to his miserable self, which is understandable. Interesting as to the trepidation of letting in a new character. I don't buy the idea that she'd be a good counselor. She is way too unsure of herself. And again, we have the same issue as to the Symbiont. Is it a USB drive or a character? Isn't the person the driver and you can't take the slug out of it? After all those times, you could. Are Worf, Bashir, Quark attracted to the person or to the slug? Well, at least Star Trek is consistent in its lack of consistency on these matters. Ezri by DeBoer was acted sincerely. Sisko is solid as always. The line that she needs a counselor echoing the belief that psychiatrists need psychiatrists themselves was cute. Garak's anxiety felt genuine, as well as his difficulty in dealing with the fact that he's essentially harming his own kind was well conveyed. Excuse me. What I can't stand is that Odo seems to now be transformed to a hanger-on, a whipped version of his prior self. Hey guys, what costumes can I wear? Shut up. His schmoopiness with Kira at the end makes me gag. Kyle Barrett.
I hope she implements a dress code that you have to wear club casual to come see her.
That's right. All black. Excuse me. What is happening with this cold?
So, that actually makes me think of something kind of interesting.
Sure.
Do you feel that there are any parallels here to what they were doing with the Doctor on Discovery? Because it seems to be sort of in the same ballpark, right?
Sort of. The Doctor on Discovery doesn't... I guess he's infected by the spores at that point.
Yeah, he's been recreated by the spores and is now like a completely new being, but still has the memories of
right,
the old Doctor. And
he's the same.
Stamets is trying to get back with him, and he's like, "I'm a different person now." You can tell because I'm not wearing a tie.
Yeah, I guess that highlights the Discovery weakness, because I don't know why he would be a different person in that case. Yeah.
Well, we don't have to relitigate that. I think we went on for a while about that.
But I think that's that sort of highlights the difference between the series. I don't think either works particularly well, but the Discovery thing was built on the idea that you just have to accept that he is now a different person, when I don't really understand fundamentally why he would be different. At least Jadzia or Ezri is making the argument that you're supposedly this mix of these two things and you're a totally new product by the end of it, but the mushroom recreation doesn't seem like it should be any different. I don't know. Kyle Barrett says, Afterimage, an obligatory episode that has the tough task of introducing Ezri to the crew. It's a fairly unspectacular installment, but one that succeeds at what it's trying to do. The new Dax is instantly likable, and her vacillating could easily make her annoying, but a good script and a great performance make her quite the opposite. I like Worf here too. He's usually played for laughs now, but here he's a genuinely imposing figure. A Trill is a cool idea for a counselor, although I'm not sure how good Ezri is at this point, because she just seems to stand there doing nothing as Garak shouts his problems at her. Overall, a solid episode that does the job it was supposed to do. Last comment. Samuel S. My takeaway from this episode is that Ezri is fine, I guess. Still, I think the situation in which she's paired with Garak is a great way to contrast her character with Jadzia's, which honestly is the only thing the show really has time to do with her in the last season. 3 out of 5. Thank you very much, patrons, for leaving your thoughts. Thank you for supporting the show. Clay, what are you going to give this one on your scale of 1 to 5?
I think I'm going to go with a 3. Like you said, I think it's the definition of a 3, but it's like barely hanging on as a 3, I think. Because I think it's a big missed opportunity to really get into some, heady, weird shit. And yeah, it's not the it's neither the continuation nor the conclusion of the Dax story that the character really deserved, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think I'm going to go with a low 3.
I'll give it a low 3 as well. It's just a 3, I guess, for me on my scale. But yeah, it's kind of a frustrating one for me. I wish it had been done better. I really think that the Dax character doesn't belong in the show fundamentally anymore at this point, and I thought that you could make a statement about that by having her leave. I know that that's kind of unfair to judge it because of the way that the show was done back in the 90s. This character is just going to replace her and be around. But if that's the case, I think you needed to strengthen your argument as to why she is able to stay beyond just Worf accepting it. Like, I think that there needs to be some sort of exploration of what the Trill are that would enable Worf to think of her as totally different in a way that I feel like he's just more accepting of the fact that this is different at the end than really like feeling that. I guess that's kind of a weird thing to describe it, but I don't feel like Worf comes to terms with it so much as he's just kind of forced to accept it at the end. And I think that's the weakness for it. If Dax is going to stick around, I think he needs to do a better job of explaining why this character would stick around and why it would make sense that she would do so.
Yeah, I mean, it would actually even be kind of like interesting if they had gone a different way with it, where she didn't want to stick around, but for some reason the symbiote wanted to stay,
Yeah.
Like if it was that she was drawn back there for some reason, like, oh, it's against all protocol for me to come back here because the symbiote, blah, 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 continuing lives or whatever. But the
symbiote had learned something when Jadzia was killed by the prophets
exactly.
or something.
And then you could, with a similar idea about that brain damage symbiote thing I'm talking about, where it's like, there's something drawing me back here. It knew obviously we're rewriting a good chunk of this already on the fly, so it obviously doesn't work. But
yeah, it's just not satisfying the way it came out, though.
Yeah,
like you need something else there to build your interest into why this character would hang out on the station.
Yeah, I mean, it could have even been something as simple as saying, like, as Ezri, I can tell you, I don't want to be here. I think this is too hard. It's unfair to all of you to be here, but Dax wants to be here. There's some sort of unfinished business here, whether or not it's personal or military in nature. There's a reason. I'm here for a reason, that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. No,
which at least gives you an out to either like don't address it at all, or gives you something you can do down the line if you wanted to come back and be like, oh, well, what it was that when she was blasted by the Pa Wraith, she saw the vision of what was going to happen. I don't know, some bullshit like that,
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. All right, I'm going to give it a 3. Clay will give it a 3. That's it. We're done. Thank you for listening. You can follow all the social media links down below. Facebook, Twitter, Discord. You can go to patreon.com/thepenskyfile if you want to support the show there financially. Much appreciated. I think that's pretty much it. We're going to be back with another episode. It's Take Me Out to the Holosuite, I think, which is a baseball-themed episode, Clay. Which is actually... I'll say now, I think it's better than that sounds, so we'll see what your reaction to it is in a couple days. Do you have anything you want to plug before we head off?
Yeah, if we get up to $900, I will watch this baseball episode.
Time is of the essence, people. Act quickly. Excuse me. Well, hopefully my cold will be better by the time that we roll around with Take Me Out to the Holosuite.
It wouldn't be a Pensky File podcast without at least one of us stopping to hack up a lung every couple minutes. So.
And I apologize, but if anyone wants to edit these and cut the coughs out, feel free to do that, but I'm not going to do that, so these coughs remain. Hopefully they're not too upsetting to everybody, but I don't know. There's only so much you can do. There's only so many hours in the day, and there's only one lifetime that we have to live as opposed to a Trill. If I was a Trill, I would cut out all these coughs and not feel bad about it.
Trills have the best podcast. Their editing is just spectacular. You know that, do you ever listen to like Radio Lab where they do that thing where they just take 5 different people talking at the same time and like cut it up word by word?
Yes.
And so I fucking hate that so much. But those are edited by Trills.
Yes, absolutely. They just pass the job on to the next person. You can't even escape your labor and death with the Trill, unfortunately.
If you were a Trill and you joined up to be a Scientologist, you would be screwed because when you become a Scientologist, you have isn't it like a billion-year contract?
Yeah, you can't get out of it.
Yeah, after you're reincarnated, you are still in service of Sea Org. So maybe that's what it was. Maybe Starfleet is actually Sea Org. Extrapolated it out, and we didn't even see this coming, guys. And so she's bound by her billion-year contract to come back to Deep Space Nine.
I feel like is there a movie or something that's based on this idea where the new reborn Trill, but it wouldn't be a Trill in whatever case, can't tell its old family about what it is? That's kind of a Highlander conceit, I guess, right?
Sort of, yeah. Yeah,
I guess the Trill kind of are similar to the Highlanders there, I guess, except that they go around telling everybody that that's what they do.
Well, they're really the most similar to the Doctor from Doctor Who, because the Doctor, every time he dies, he regenerates into a new person, a completely new person, who still has all the memories and experiences of the previous persons, except they are not, depending on how they write it, it varies from, I know everything to... it's there, but it's only kind of there in the periphery.
Yeah. If you were a Trill, what's the first thing you would do in your new body?
Find someone from my personal life who I really wanted to punch in the back of the head but couldn't, and then punch them in the back of the head because they wouldn't know who I was, and then I would run.
Oh my goodness! I'll have to think about it. I'll come up with an episode before an answer for the holosuite. But that's it for the Ezri Dax episode Afterimage. Guys, thank you very much for listening. We'll see you next time.